When it comes to Social Security, how do people not see this? All right, so there's a big debate in the financial planning realm about when to file for Social Security and whatnot. It's somewhat interesting to me. I mean, I like when financial planners got enough guts to say, this guy is calling out other people in, respectful ways. But one thing about the financial planning industry is we're all very polite. We don't want to hurt anyone's feelings and say, no. And I wish we'd be a little bit more harsh when it comes to the truth, because many financial planners and financial planning professionals, and that includes academics, I'm including them in here, they have whoa, Squirrely, get the hell out of the way, Squirrely. I didn't hit him. They have a tendency to sometimes overstate things. We're evidence-based financial planners, and we, the academics say, blah, blah, blah. It's very frustrating to me because the academics don't work with clients. Financial planners actually do, and the academics look down at us because we're not academics, but we're actually working for finance. We're actually working with clients. So we actually see what's going on. On the other hand, a lot of financial planners view academics as the freaking, the God's chosen. And they're like, oh, well, the academic, it just drives you up the wall. Anyway, be that as it may. So my man Derek Tharp had written an article that apparently is just published in the Wall Street Journal. So Derek Tharp is moving on up to the sky with George Jefferson, man. And I love George Jefferson. Anyway, so it's pretty cool. And he's, kind of, I don't want to say calling out, but, he's taking issue with some ideas on when to file for Social Security. And the issue is just a matter of this right here. It really comes down to this. Do you expect the markets to give you a higher rate of return than what you can get by deferring Social Security? It's just that simple. Just that simple. If you expect the markets to give you 8, 9, 10%, you'd be crazy to wait for Social Security. You'd just be crazy because you're sitting there at 62 with X amount of dollars. You say, I can draw, for simplicity, $25,000 a year from my portfolio, or I can withdraw $25,000 a year on Social Security. It will be reduced. All right. And if you're drawing $25,000 a year from your portfolio for the next 8 years, that's $25,000 times 8, which is $200,000. That won't be getting that 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% rate of return on the market. It's just that simple. On the other hand, and on top of that, you can say, hey, I have more money to leave to my kids, blah, 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 100%. On the other hand, you say, hey, I don't expect the market to do what it has done in the past. I expect Social Security will be a net positive for me because I think the returns on Social Security deferring are better than the returns I expect in the market. And this is where I tend to be. I actually tend to believe that the market may not be overpriced, but we've had such a major run for the last 15 years. I don't see how that run's going to continue. And markets are continuing on what? Earnings growth year over year plus dividend yield plus now you got to add stock buybacks. Now, again, when Bogle came up with this wonderful formula, it was before stock buybacks were a thing. So we got earnings growth year over year. And frankly, earnings growth year over year and stock buybacks are part of the same coin, of the same whatever it is, because earnings growth is stock buybacks reduces shares, which increase earnings growth per share. So you can look at two sides of the same coin. Either way, it doesn't matter. The facts are earnings growth plus dividend yields equals long-term returns. That's just all there is to it. And so the question for me is, where's the earnings growth going to come? Now, people say AI, productivity. I get that, but I think that's already been baked in there, man. Baked in there. So now we have PE ratios of 28 for the S&P 500, 30 or something like that. I can't remember. Maybe 25. I just don't know these are sustainable numbers in terms of we expected 8, 9, 10% rate of return, especially given the last 15 years we've averaged 13, 14% in the S&P 500. I don't think that's reasonable to assume that's going to continue on. I don't, especially with a declining population worldwide. Europe's dead, Canada's dead, the United States is starting to become dead in terms of we're not having enough babies. People are growth engines. That's just a fact. More people means more growth, 100%. Less people means you're going into a stagnation and then a deflation without question. So I don't expect that to happen. So on top of that, people say, yeah, but they could cut Social Security. And I'm like, dude, so you're going to rely on the equity market. It's so crazy to me. They're going to cut Social Security, so I'm going to get mine when I'm getting it now. So the stock market will be better? Does that make any sense at all? If they cut Social Security, what do you think happens to equities? Do you think equity markets are removed from the government largesse? Are you freaking crazy, man? If they cut Social Security 80 million people have to come up with a certain, about 20% from someplace else, which means inherently there's going to be a mass selling of their financial resources, which will do what to stocks? It's not going to make them grow. It's the craziest thing. I don't understand that line of thinking that says, hey, I'm going to get mine now because I'm going to cut Social Security and I let my stocks grow. I'm like, okay, I don't buy that at all. Now, you might be on the other side of this. You might say, no, I think the equity market, and this is a good argument to make. I get it, and I would like to make it too, but I don't have enough faith in this as opposed to deferring Social Security. I have more faith in the government to provide me my Social Security benefit fully than I do in the capital markets to continue the explosive growth we've seen for the last 15 years. I just do. And what happens here is the capital markets, basically 20%, maybe 10% of the investors actually own the bulk of the capital markets. You see what I'm saying? So you get enough people that are having their Social Security being declined, they're going to be pitchforks. And as such, the politicians, as rightly they would, they say, look, man, I'm sorry if you're in the capital markets, but you're going to have to take the cut, as opposed to me going back to my constituents and saying they're going to have to deal with Social Security being cut while the capital market, the people in the capital markets just get off, scot-free. And do you not remember the GM bailout? What happened to GM bailout? Bondholders got smoked, and guess who did not? Oh, the unions. Why? Because the unions had more votes than the bondholders. Just a fact. So the GM bonds, the unions made off like a bandit. The bondholders themselves had to take a cut. The bondholders were not as politically astute or as large. Anyway, this is just common sense to me. So when it comes down to Social Security, the one thing before anything else, taxes, survivor benefits, the whole thing is, do you expect higher rates of return in the equity markets, or do you expect higher rates of return for Social Security deferral? And as a conservative, not politically conservative, but as a somewhat conservative, cautiously pessimistic guy with my Toronto Blue Jays shirt on, because, the Spankies suck. We got to go for the BJs. The BJs! Oh, my goodness. We got to go for the BJs. Oh, I didn't realize this is a kid's channel. How dare I? Yeah, the Blue Jays got the best freaking logo. Look at that, dude. You tell me that's not the best logo in all sports? There's a couple better ones, but Blackhawks, Chicago Blackhawks is freaking fantastic. But that's a great logo. I'm trying to think what else is a good logo. The old Pat the Patriot, my favorite logo of all time. Pat the Patriot. The Bruins, the Spoke B is pretty good, but that's just fantastic. I love the Blue Jay guy. The Orioles is a great logo too. The smiling Oriole with a baseball hat on. The old Miami Dolphins beautiful hat guy was fantastic until they stupidly turned it around. The Raiders is a great logo too, but that's fantastic, dude. Anyway, the point being is, my sister just said, I think she said something about the Boston Celtics, which is a pretty cool logo too, and if it's right, you can't lie. Anyway, so going back, if you expect the stock market to do better, let's say 8%, you should defer a stock. You should take Social Security early. If you expect the stock market to do relatively poor relative to the stock market, relative to the Social Security, that doesn't mean losing money. It just means anything below 6% year over year. If you expect that, and that's gross, nominal rates of return. You factor in inflation, that's a 3% net, something like that. And if you expect that, then I would take Social Security later. If I expect stocks that give me a booming rate of return, I would defer. I would take Social Security now. If I expect stocks to give me a lower than average rate of return, I would defer Social Security. That's the number one thing. And just secondly, and here's the argument you can make about stocks still continuing to do well. For this whole century, the stock market is only, the S&P 500 is only averaged like 8% a year. I think it's a little bit less than that when you factor in the last decade of the odds. So the last 15 years have been freaking crazy bullish. But the previous decade before that was one of the few lost decades we've ever had. So now you can say we're just right back to where we should be in terms of the market performance over the last 25 years. But then I say, well, then you got to factor in the 1980s and 1990s when the market was booming. So we've had 3 decades, the 80s, the 90s, the 10s, and then halfway into the 20s, and we've had 1 bad decade. So we've had basically 3.5 major performing decades, with 1 bad one in between. I just think at the end of the day, the tendency of me being a Mainer is that I think we're probably going to go into a lower return market, and that's what I use in my right capital, because I think that's the way you should present that. All right, love your thoughts. God bless. Don't smash that like button. Smash the negative, the down like button. if you will. We'll see.